everybody! I'm still in the process of figuring out what I want to do with my channel, so I decided to re-record a previous video that I've made that is in Portuguese, which is about 1984. You can click in the link in the upper corner of the video if you want to take a look at it. So just to summarize what happened, I was doing this series of reviews on the 4chan beginner recommendation list from the Lit board. And instead of making a review on 1984, I decided to talk about something else because truly I don't think we need another video reviewing 1984. You already know what the book's about. We all do. It's one of the most discussed books today. You can't have something happen without people going like, oh my god, it's 1984! And if you haven't read it already, then I'm not going to be the one to convince you. You know, it's a good book, it's easy to read, it's important, and it's free, baby! Not illegally free, actually free. So, you know, just go read it. I think you should read it even if you don't like 1984 or isn't a fan of dystopian fiction, because it's a book that is important, everyone comments about it. So if you don't like it, you can just go and say, well, you are actually quoting the book wrong, that's not what happens. Or you can dismiss it and say, well, I actually read the book and it sucks, it's garbage. So it's a quick read, it's easy, just go read it already. Alternatively, don't read anything else for the rest of your life and watch my videos, especially this one, which I will be discussing a review that Isaac Asimov made for 1984. So I haven't actually read any books by Isaac Asimov. I have begun reading The Caves of Steel, but I didn't finish it, not because it was a bad book, but because of my flaws as a person. So I don't have anything against Isaac Asimov. In fact, I've thought that the book was pretty good. I liked the introduction that he made, that he wrote. Knowledge is always good because people are afraid of knowledge, afraid of discussion, think that too much knowledge will bring the end of the world. But if the problem is knowledge, then the solution is more knowledge. You know, he has this kind of view that's optimistic, very humanistic. I like the guy, which is why I'm so surprised that this review is fucking garbage. I am not joking, this review is terrible. Like, what is even happening here? I'm going to talk about the review, but I recommend you go and read it for yourself before I go and influence your fragile little minds. I was reading for the New York Times on the 80s, you know, when people were starting to talk about 1984, and so many people were like, Asimov, read this book, make a review, and he was like, okay. He didn't want to do this, he clearly didn't. And he said, I felt I would have to write the critique if only to set people straight. I'm sorry, I love setting people straight. Gonna tell you, Asimov, mood. So he started talking that he was reading by Eric Arthur Blair, which is the real name of George Orwell, and he started talking about the life of the guy, and it's so bitter. He absolutely hates Eric Blair. You should read this, really, I mean it. As a quick summary for this video, George Orwell was a guy that was rich, but he was like, well, I don't know, being rich is kind of cool, but I kind of want to become a socialist now. And so he went to Spain to fight against the totalitarian government, and he had some bad experiences there. He experienced a lot of the communists in fighting, the leftists in fighting. So he decided to write 1984 based on his experiences. It wasn't the story of a right-wing guy that saw the world being dominated by communists. It was written by someone from the left wing that saw a lot of the infighting, and he wasn't writing from an anti-leftist point of view. He was writing from an anti-totalitarian point of view. And I'm not saying that the guy is perfect, because he isn't. He ratted out a bunch of communists to the government, that was not nice, nobody likes a teetotaler. But a lot of people try to act like he doesn't know what communism is, and honestly, he probably knows more than you. You can criticize the writer if you want, you can criticize his writings, you just can't criticize him on the grounds that he doesn't know what communism is. So yeah, we're skipping this part for now because I don't think that it's that important for the review, except for this paragraph that I think that it's kind of weird. I think it's really weird that Asimov has taken this position because he's basically saying that it's immoral to criticize a country if it's useful to you. Yes, Russia and the Soviet Union has sacrificed a lot of lives to stop fascism, but It's not like they did it because they were good people, because they were saints. They were like, well, I'm going to help them from the good of my heart. They had their interests. And the Soviet Union did have a pact of non-aggression with Hitler, so... And I don't think that it's Orwell's responsibility of not criticizing the Soviet Union. I think that you as a writer are free to criticize whatever you want. I think it's the responsibility of big media, of your editors, of the foreign relations of your country to stop you from doing that. Like what happened here. He wrote the thing, he criticized the country, and his editors were like, no, we're not going to publish this right now. We're going to wait a little bit until the war ends and we don't need the Soviet Union as much. And that happened, you know. War ended and they could publish the book. And Asimov thinks that it's wrong that Orwell even wrote the book in the first place. Like, you can criticize the country for things that you think are morally abhorrent, even if the country is personally useful to you. And I don't know, man, it's just weird. I do not agree with this at all. He also mentions a bit about Nazism. We're going to come back to this later. Oh, it actually comes up right now, look at that. Yeah, he swore it's against Stalinism only. He never mentions Nazis, he doesn't mention other forms of totalitarianism. What a weird criticism. Yeah, you want to write about a totalitarian society, you have to write about them all, I guess. 1984 was written in 1948, for starters. The Second World War was already over, the Nazis were arrested, they were facing trial. It's not like Nazis was the big fear of the time. People were starting to get worried about Russians already. So it's not like there was a demand for literature to be against the Nazis, because the Nazis were already defeated. It makes perfect sense that he wouldn't write about them. And even if they weren't defeated already, as I said, just because you want to write about a totalitarian form of government that you fought side by side and sometimes against, doesn't mean you have to write about them all, man. I would rather read the writer talk a lot about something that he understands and only that thing than try to branch out to everything else and it's not working because he doesn't know the material as well. And then he goes on about how the public received it, 1984, and saw it not as a book against anti-totalitarianism, but actually saw it as a book anti-communism, and it wasn't the intention, but Asimov was talking about the public and their interpretations of the book and not about the actual book. So section B starts and he starts talking about the science fiction 1984, and he says that it doesn't actually try to predict the future, it doesn't move 30 years in the future, but it moves thousands of kilometers to Moscow. And not as a shade to Asimov, at least not right now, but I'm just going to complain about something with you guys. I absolutely hate it when people think that a book lives or dies depending on how well they predict the future, because books are works of art. It's not a fucking oracle. If you want to read predictions of the future, go consult with political experts, go to a psychic. If you're reading about a dystopian book, you're reading about a person's thoughts and feelings on their current time and how he's trying to process them. It's a work of art, it's not a prediction. And a book isn't good because it predicts what happens to the future. You got the relation of cause and consequence all switched up. What happens is the writer understands how society works, the flaws of human beings, and understands that those aren't easily changeable, and can accurately predict that people will still be people. And he does have a somewhat clear understanding of what's happening around him and of the political commentary that he's making. So the fact that the book predicted the future and the fact that it's good is actually two things with the same cause, because the writer is smart and observant. And even if the book didn't predict the future, doesn't mean it's bad, okay? Okay, let's move on. And then he started talking about the espionage technology, about how the government is keeping an eye on everyone. And he says this, which kind of shows to me that Isaac Asimov didn't understand the book and didn't try to. One of the most important things about 1984, which I would argue is the most important thing about the book, is that the government lies to you, like, constantly. People don't know what's fake or what's true. The narrator of the book, the writer, Winston, he doesn't know the year. He goes like, is it 1984 really, or is the government lying to us? So if the government says that he's spying on you, that might not be true. Maybe they aren't spying on you constantly. There is actually a group of people that believes that the government didn't actually know that Winston was rebelling against it. Like in the interrogation scene, we spent 9 years keeping watch on you, Winston. You don't know if that's true. You're only completely sure that the government knew that Winston wasn't happy with them when they went to the spy and rent out the room. So believing that the government is constantly keeping an eye on people is already a pretty big assumption. And also, I don't think that Asimov understands how security cameras work. I don't know if they existed in the 80s, I think they did, but security cameras aren't necessarily there because a guy is keeping an eye on you all the time. Sometimes the camera is there because if something fucks up, they can watch the recording later. It's not just a guy is seeing you doing bad things and can catch you. It's just that if you do, they can catch you later. And also, Asimov is clearly not familiar with the concept of the panopticon, which means that you don't actually need to watch people all the time for them to behave. You only need to watch them sometimes and make sure that people don't understand the difference, that they don't understand when they're being watched or not. So they will behave regardless of whether you're being watched. And to cap it all off, later he says this, which is so weird to me. Can you imagine you're reading a review for a restaurant and the guy is like, I don't think that fish goes well with chocolate. If you make a fish and you make a chocolate sauce, it's so stupid. It tastes horrible. It's wrong. So I guess I'm happy that the restaurant didn't do it. Like, my guy, why did you spend so much time complaining about a thing? They'd be like, well, I guess we should be thankful that the book didn't do that. Oh my god, what is wrong with this? Before we continue, I just wanted to make something clear here. As I have said before, a very important thing of 1984 is that the government lies to you. So it is important to understand that we don't really know exactly what's happening, and many people have different theories about what's going on with the government. Does Oceania really exist? Is it the entire world? Is it only Great Britain? Is it only London? We just literally don't know. A lot of people discuss this and you might have different interpretations than me or Asimov. And just to make it clear, I think that Asimov is completely allowed to interpret whatever he wants. The book gave this freedom to him and he can do whatever he wants with it. I just wanted to make it clear that Asimov could be analyzing the book in a more benign way, could be less mean-spirited, and he has decided not to. Again, not his fault, he's clearly capable of doing that. Just saying that when you read the book, you might have a different vision than him and don't see the same criticisms that he does. In the next part, Asimov is trying to criticize the society of 1984, saying that George Orwell can't imagine a lot of future technology, and I've already talked about why I don't think this is an actual real criticism, because here's what might be a very unpopular opinion. I don't believe that the point of 1984 is to say that Oceania will exist in the future. I don't think that the book is good if you analyze it that way, because it's very unlikely that it will really exist. But I think there is a very other, more pertinent question, which is, why does this society not fall? Why does this society that is based around pain, literally, that's what they say, why is it still around? Why hasn't people rebelled? And the book does a very good job answering these questions, and it actually taught me a lot about how totalitarian regimes stay in power in real life. I think that the most important thing that 1984 taught me was in the torture scene, in which the torturer tells Winston, one of our mottos is freedom is slavery, but the motto is reversible, slavery is freedom. Because when you are one singular person, you can die. Your life's not worth anything. But when you're part of a crowd, when you're part of a movement, then you live forever. And I think that this is what draws a lot of people into cults, into these political organizations that are clearly bad, because they want to feel a part of something. They want to feel a part of change. And there are other things that 1984 talks about, because it's not a book about the future, it's a book about today, 1948, and we haven't really evolved much as a species. So I don't really think that 1984 needs to be this technological predictor, but I do think that the assumption of Orwell that a totalitarian regime like Oceania would have technological regression is not really unfounded. For starters, people are more poor and they can't really afford amazing technological marvels of the future. And today we do see a lot of regimes that try to restrict things like the internet, for example. And the book does portray Oceania as having technological advancement, but it's all part of the government, because there's basically no private initiative, small businesses, this kind of thing. So yeah, I do believe that it was all fairly well explained and justified in the book. And here, Asimov starts talking about the future which he lives in, that is the future from 1948, that people don't wear shoelaces. And I know it is a nitpick, but I do think it's extremely funny. I mean, I am from the future, and I do wear shoelaces. I stole them from the president. And then he just goes into this rant because Orwell is apparently a technophobe. And okay, let's leave aside that a technophobe would not write a dystopia that is a technophobe society, but he starts talking about the guy that wanted to write with one of those old pens with a nib. Oh, because a modern pen is so much better because it doesn't scratch the paper. My guy! It's obvious that this obsession with the past is a kind of escapism that is like fucking sucks, and he wants to escape from it, so that's why he started fantasizing about the past. And it's very easy to have an interpretation of 1984 that this escapism is actually bad, because Winston decided to rent an old room, the house of a literal government spy. He and Julia are literally arrested in that room. And there is this piece of coral that he buys that is on a glass case or something, and when they're getting arrested, the coral breaks. Winston can see how small it is, that it looks so much larger. And it's very easy to read this as a metaphor that, well, you got arrested by the government, no more escapings for you, now you're... So yeah, I have no idea where the fuck did Asimov get this interpretation that Orwell is a technophobe. Jesus. Yeah, so Asimov goes on about how the characters of 1984 doesn't have new vices, don't use new drugs. Oh man, what a terrible book. The characters wear shoelaces, they don't smoke crack. And he says that 1984 is bad science fiction, and you know, man, I agree with you. It's bad science fiction, but it's not trying to be. Dystopias and science fiction are not completely unrelated genres, but they're obviously very different. He does notice that the book isn't trying to be science fiction. And you know, I do also agree that 1984 is a terrible cooking book, but I don't think it really hampered my enjoyment of this piece of art, you know? And then he says this about the book, and honestly, man, did you read 1984? The book literally opens with Winston on a movie session, and this woman starts screaming at people that you shouldn't show these horrible murders on screen, and she gets taken away by the police. There are people that want to rebel against the government. There are people that dislike them. The whole point of the repression apparatus is to stop these people. The government of Oceania literally has to murder, to assassinate citizens that are capable of causing rebellion. And one thing that is a very heartwarming touch is that the love song that was created manages to outlast the popularity of the hate song. That's actually pretty sweet. Even if we were to agree that 1984 is a completely bleak depiction of society and everyone there sucks and is an asshole, and we take this paragraph at face value, like, my guy, that's just your opinion. If you are optimistic about mankind, that's good for you, but you could make as much as a valid argument that mankind fucking sucks. I think that the last couple of years have proved that very well. I think it's really funny that we have this review in which Asimov's like, well, I'm from the future and I'm more right than you, and that's not how things work. And I'm like, well, Asimov, I'm from the future, and I'm gonna say you are wrong, and this is how things really work. And Asimov's like, yeah, This book isn't optimistic, therefore it's bad. And I think that 1984% is a pretty good argument for why people would behave the way they do in their society, honestly. Like, the dude lived in the 80s, there were still totalitarian dictatorships on that day. There are still totalitarian dictatorships today. And then Asimov spends the next 2 paragraphs calling the book sexist, and I gotta say that I actually agree. I wouldn't say that I agree exactly with what he said, but I do agree that there are some things that are kinda shitty. Asimov tries to tell us that Julia is portrayed as a stupid woman, and I don't think that I agree. Julia is portrayed as being very resourceful, and she does ask things that the main character didn't really think about. And she said, well, she's not interested in politics because she's a woman. And honestly, man, worrying about politics in this society wouldn't really get you anywhere. She's trying to survive, she's trying to be happy, and she's completely justified in doing that. Winston tries to go into politics, and look where that got him. But there are some scenes in 1984 that are like, oh, Julia put on some makeup and a dress because that's what a real woman looks like. Not those government women that don't look like women. They wear overalls and they work. It's like... yeah, this book has some problems. So, section C, 1984 government, yay! Asimov spends a couple of paragraphs talking about real-life tyrannies like Hitler and Mussolini, and he says that governments based on personality codes usually don't last that long because when the personality ends, they die, it just falls apart. And I gotta say, Asimov, I think that Orwell agrees with you. Have you ever wondered why the Big Brother doesn't have a name, doesn't have any kind of identity? He might not even be a person. In the torture scene, Winston asks the guy, "Is Big Brother real?" The torturer says, "What do you mean real?" And Winston says, "Well, is he real? Like me and you?" And the other guy says, "You're not real." And yeah, later he says that Big Brother is real, but considering that he denied the existence of a very real physical person, I don't think we can really trust that guy. What I'm trying to say is that it seems very likely that Big Brother is some kind of Stalinist, Vocaloid, VTuber. You know exactly what I mean. So I wouldn't count all those paragraphs as something against 1984, that personality codes wouldn't prosper for a very long time. I'm honestly counting this as a point in favor of 1984, just saying. I swear to fucking god, Asimov did not read this piece of shit book. Oh my god. So Asimov goes on and says that Orwell essentially tells you that you need 2 things to make your totalitarian government work. First one is you give someone to hate, which you know works in real life, it's true, it's correct. And the second one is that you need to rewrite history in your favor. Asimov says that it's kind of an overkill what the government does because you don't actually need to rewrite history. You can just go with the fake news. You can just ignore evidence. That's what happens in real life. And yeah, I do kind of agree, but I don't think that the government is necessarily looking at efficiency here. There's this entire week in which they changed Oceania's opponent mid-speech, and they need to go through all the records, burning down everything, and then everything just changes. So considering that Oceania is a government founded in pain, I don't think they're necessarily looking at efficiency here. They're like, let's just throw the people. That's gonna be hilarious. Lol. So section D is about the international world of 1984, and he praises the fact that Orwell managed to predict that China and Russia would not be friends. And that is because Orwell has a lot of experience with leftist infighting, and he wasn't a right-wing nut that thought that the communists would get together and destroy the entirety of the world. And he started talking about how technological advancements in war would implicate in technological advancements elsewhere, and I've already talked about it, but just it bears repeating. If you have a government and it's as totalitarian as Oceania, it makes a lot of sense that they would repress technology like that, especially because they can. I don't think we've ever had a government before that actively squashed down technological advancements that way. Even in medieval ages, if someone came up with a better productive way to raise cattle or plant stuff, I think that they would be all for it. And again, there is no private initiatives in Oceania. There are no private businesses. The government controls everything, so it would be easy for them to squash down technological progress. I don't think it is a very good criticism of the book. And so we find ourselves the last two paragraphs of this text in which he says that George Orwell, 1984, was engaging in a private field of Stalinism and he wasn't attempting to forecast the future. Yeah, man, how crazy. I can't believe a writer would do that, would try to write a book about what he believes instead of trying to forecast the future. That just ruined the entire experience of reading 1984. And here he says that if we imagine that 1984 is accurate, then we will not be defending ourselves against assaults from the right direction. So I disagree with him on that notion. I've already said that 1984 is very good at describing the mechanism in which a totalitarian government might exist and might gain followers. And I just wanted to say something here. There will never be a time in our lives or even in the general scope of humanity in which we will not have to worry about authoritarianism or totalitarianism, especially in this century. Yes, we do see progress being made, we do see more rights being respected, for example, LGBT people being more respected, but your rights can always be taken from you. You should never be content with how things are because they can change in an instant. In fact, the more you start gaining rights, the more people that hate you will start fighting you harder and harder. And so the threat of authoritarianism is always something that is going to be present in our society, and we do need to look out for it. And I do believe that 1984 does a good job in describing the ways that authoritarian society can stay in power. The thing about having an enemy, for example, is actually pretty useful. It's always useful to look out for any kind of government that tries to elect itself into power. Oh, you should elect me into power because you hate the gays, right? You hate the criminals. You hate the same kinds of people as you. So join me and we will hate those people together. We will defeat the enemy, even if that victory will not actually bring you anything good. I'm gonna say, Asimov, I'm not as optimistic as you. I wish I could, but it's a little hard. I do not believe that we live in a track of constant progress. So, what did we learn? Well, we learned that apparently Asimov didn't read 1984. There's no way that someone that actually read 1984 would do this many shit takes on 1984. Holy shit. So what happened here? I have three theories. From most likely to least likely, first one is the 80s. People are being really fucking annoying, kind of like Harry Potter fans, except a little better because 1984 is actually about society, so it's not like they're doing political comparisons with a fucking wizard book. And they're like, oh my god, this is just like 1984, are we approaching 1984? And he got fed up about it and be like, oh my god, this book sucks, I'm going to write this scathing review, makes no sense, just to dunk on this book. The second thing that could have happened is that Isaac Asimov is a Brave New World fanboy. There's this fight against these books, it's pretty weird. It actually started with the writers, they didn't like each other. When I see a lot of people criticizing 1984 because they support North Korea online, they say, wow, you should read Brave New World, it's better. So maybe Asimov really likes Brave New World and so he feels obligated to shit on 1984. The third thing is that George Orwell fucked his mom. And he's really pissed off at him, like, yeah, I'm gonna write this scathing review because George Orwell fucked my mom.
Did you fuck my mom?
What do you mean?
Did you fuck my mom, Santa Claus? Did you fuck my mom?
Yeah, can't prove that it didn't happen. So yeah, I don't have anything against Isaac Asimov. He's a pretty good writer, I respect him a lot. I have no fucking idea what happened here. But you know, nothing against the guy, just saying. If anything, we should be angry at the 1984 fanboys that keeps comparing everything to 1984. If you do that, please stop doing that because you don't need to do it. 1984 gives you the tools to recognize authoritarian governments and can just use those. If someone is censoring you, can say, wow, that is censorship and censorship is bad. You don't have to go, oh, this is just like 1984. Just have some self-respect. And if you like this, consider sending this to any 1984 haters that defend North Korea online, that keep talking shit about 1984 because they didn't read the book. And, well, consider giving this a like and subscribing. Leave a comment down below saying your opinions on 1984. Why not? Let's have a civil discussion in the internet. Drop a comment down below saying what's your opinion and see you next video.